Well, welcome to the Faith of the Fathers podcast. I'm your host, Carl Gessler, and I am reigniting the calling of men in the world. One of the things that men love to be is extreme. They love to be on the edge. They love to stand out. We're competitive. God made us that way. But when it comes to following Jesus, many times there can be competition in that regard too, which is much more subtle. Many of us men, including myself, want to be a better Christian than the next person, which, in a healthy way, we should just want to be the best that we can be for the sake of Jesus and for the sake of helping others, not beating others. That's the trick. As a Christian, we're not called to be better than the next guy. We're called to give Jesus our all and to help the next guy become all that God intended for them to be. But we're drawn to extremes because we like to do the hard things. God made us to be adventure seekers, to be up to a challenge. And so many times we can fall into the traps of cults. We can fall into the traps of just extremes. And a few years ago, I had a friend who created a poverty simulation camp. And their whole idea was really embracing being the least of these, that Jesus came for the poor. Personally, I felt like while I understood and appreciated the genuine intention of the camp, I felt like it was eccentric and imbalanced. And so I wasn't really, I supported the desire to be completely dedicated to Jesus, but I wasn't really sold on the camp. And the camp drew eccentric people. One of those people was a man named Bracken, and he dressed very extremely conservatively, as far as I was concerned, and he even wore a tunic. He had a big beard, and I assumed a lot of things about him because he was at this camp. I just assumed he was also eccentric and extreme. I never really got to know him at that time, but maybe a year later, something like that, he called me up and he wanted to meet me at Chick-fil-A and to talk. And to be honest, I was a little wary of that conversation. I don't know what I expected, but I just expected we wouldn't have that much in common, and that maybe we would get into some kind of argument over. And I've been in arguments like that before with people that are very fundamentalist, and I'm not a fundamentalist. I think fundamentalism can be very damaging to people, and it is very prone to pride. I don't even know what you mean exactly by fundamentalist, other than someone who's very legalistic, I guess could be a better way of saying that. Anyway, I went and met with Bracken, and I was shocked to learn that he was that he loved music, and especially that he was a drummer, because in my experience, people that were very conservative, especially in the way that they dressed, I grew up not too far from Bob Jones University, and you could always spot a Bob Jones University person because of their collared shirts and tucked in. Their shirts were always tucked in, and those kind of people didn't like music. They didn't like the kind of music I grew up listening to and the kind of music that I played. As a matter of fact, in a church one time when we were just visiting, it was a very fundamentalist church, my brother went to the piano that was in the fellowship hall and started playing the Charlie Brown theme music, da 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 da, and this lady came into the room and said, not that kind of music. And so that was my expectation for someone who's appeared to be very conservative, that they were probably not into music, and if they were, it was not music that I was into. But it turns out Bracken was not only into music, he was a drummer, and a very good drummer. And that was one of the many lessons, many times, that I had to learn, not to judge a book by its cover, that everyone has a story and everyone's in a journey. So Bracken and I connected, and I was really surprised by that. We talked for a long time, and I really didn't know what to make of this guy. But after that first conversation, I was much more impressed, and we actually started meeting together with a couple of other friends. We formed a band that we called Glory Anthem, and we had it for a couple of years. And then at one point, Bracken, he continued to surprise me. He surprised me with his knowledge of technology, with his he dives into a subject and he really learns a subject. He just kind of gets a laser focus and goes for it. And so while we're doing our band thing, I'm all about like big events, performing. And for me, performing is really about, I like big crowds, lots of worship, changed lives, people coming, the manifest presence of God through the more voices, the better. That's always kind of my favorite thing. And so I'm, pursuing going to these churches, and our band started to get a little momentum, and Bracken put the brakes on in a way. And I was also feeling this pressure too, because we all had growing families. The three of us that were married had growing families, as it should be. You should be married first. And we had growing families, and were feeling the pressure of our practices and traveling and realizing we need to include our families. Bracken was feeling this way. He also had a bit of a different vision for music than I did. He was much more of a producer than a performer. And so he was off on the side learning this thing about vlogging, and also the way the music industry is going with streaming. Downloads are dead was one of the things he told us. People don't really buy music downloads anymore. That's not how they consume music. And so he was talking about this vlogging thing, which I had never heard of. And but what he was doing was also trying to find a way to incorporate his family into ministry instead of doing ministry that takes you away from your family. I needed to do the same. And so we decided to disband, not because we didn't like it or didn't like each other, but because we needed to include our families. And I think that is such an important bridge, watershed moment that we learned to do that. In the process of learning about Bracken, watching him work, watching his skills, watching his depth, my respect for him grew and grew. He also never told me I needed to wear a tunic, so that never bothered me. If he felt like if that was his conviction, then that's fine. It's not mine. And I just learned to really appreciate and respect Bracken. And today, the reason I'm telling you this story is because we're going to go meet Bracken. We're going to go talk to him, because the reason I do vlog, the reason I do a video at all is because of him. I don't think I ever would have gone this way, just because I'm not a technology guy, really. And Bracken has succeeded in it wildly, I would say, at least according to my book. Bracken and his wife, when we met them, were living in a camper, and then they moved into what they call the shome, which is a studio, a shed turned into a studio, which is, or a home, actually. Bracken had already turned a shed into a studio, which is where I got this idea. I'm not original, I just mimic people. And so he also took a larger shed and turned it into a home, which was a tiny home. They started a vlog called Tiny Notes from Home, and also a music, which was correlated with their music, which they called Sounds Like Rain. Many of you watching this video have already heard about Tiny Notes from Home and Brackin Kirkland and Lindsey Kirkland, and you love their family, you love their vlog. And today I wanted to go out and meet them, because I've struggled in my video efforts, just like I said, just to find my way through marketing, communicating through modern technology, and Bracken has very much succeeded in that. So we're going to go out to his place today. We're going to have a conversation with him about success. How do you become successful as a man? How do you become successful in business or in art? And how do you define success? How do you know that you're being successful? How does someone like me, who maybe hasn't generated the same kind of following as Bracken, how do I quantify success? And is it all the same way? So those are some of the questions we're going to be chasing down. Today's episode is about defining, quantifying, recognizing success. So let's go have a chat with Bracken. Today I have my good friend with me, Brackin Kirkland.
Hi, Carl. Good to be here.
I'm glad to be here. It's been too long, actually, since I've been out here. And I shared a little bit in the intro today about how we met and my surprise in learning that you were a drummer and actually constantly are full of surprises.
I didn't fit the part, did I?
You didn't. I find that's true a lot of people that when you hear their stories, they're full of surprises.
Right.
So.
Yep.
But we were in a band together, and so we go back a little ways. But I wanted to maybe rehash your testimony a little bit. You were on the podcast not a few years back, but I'm sure there's a lot of folks today listening or watching that have never heard.
Sure.
But could you give us like a quick version of how you came to the Lord or how you came back to the Lord, however you'd want to put that, and then we're going to talk a little bit about where you are today.
Sure.
In regards to success.
Yeah, I would say I'm in a very different place today than I was. Well, I'm 40 now. Can you believe it? How old are you?
Almost 40.
Almost 40, okay. So we're like old men. I'm 40 now. When I was, I'm just trying to remember, 15 years old. 15 years old. So what's that, 25 years ago? This makes me feel ancient. Yeah, I would have grown up in a Christian home, and we would have been in and out of church every time the doors were open. Had very loving, supportive parents, still do. Had a healthy home life, family relationships. Everything was intact, but around kind of 14, 15 years old, I don't know. There was just something broke inside of me. I started hanging out with the wrong kids in school and making bad decisions and getting caught up in the music and culture of mid-90s skate punk stuff. And
I remember you said the music was a big part of that too.
It was, yeah, and that's probably a whole other conversation that I would love to go into sometime. But suffice to say, when I got a hold of or when the music got a hold of me, it really took me to a dark place. I became, depressed. Started using, experimenting with drugs and alcohol. Had a kind of rough relationship in high school, and I don't know, things just weren't. I would just say broken. Broken is the word I would use. To the point that I, fast forwarding from 14, 15 up until I was 18 years old, I had run away from home. Was kind of living around, couch surfing, working a third shift, graveyard shift, and super depressed, and tried to take my own life by eating an entire bottle of pills. But the Lord was merciful through that all. He wasn't, my trials weren't over, and he wasn't done with me yet, but that was like, we hear the term rock bottom. That was one ledge on the way down, because after that, I still would have abused drugs, and been kind of lost wandering around in my van, traveling the U.S. with a bunch of hippies and experimenting with psychedelic drugs. And there was one moment that, and this ties in with the faith of the fathers, when I was on a kind of a bad LSD trip and got pulled over by the police. And I would say this is the rockest bottom,
right? Yeah,
the hardest floor. But I remember, and I think I shared this in your last podcast, but I remember the first thought that came to my mind was, what am I going to tell my dad? And how am I going to? I actually thought I'm going to have to call my dad from jail to bail me out. I was certain that I was headed for jail. But again, the Lord was merciful, and that it showed me like the depths of my sin, the depths of my depravity, the depths of my brokenness, but also like the mercy of God. And I would distinguish between mercy and grace like this. Mercy is when the Lord like passed over me in that moment. when the police officers couldn't see the incriminating evidence in my vehicle that they should have seen. That's God's mercy. But His grace was there to empower me to get up and to what's the word, like keep pressing on. You know, that's an enabling force that says, you know, where the Spirit of God says, I'm not through with you. Here's what your life looks like without me. But walk in my grace, walk in my power, and that's been a journey since my mid-20s up until now. And Lindsey, you know, when we met and got married, was a big part of that kind of healing process. And we've been married for 17 years now,
Awesome.
almost 17 years.
And expecting your first girl.
That's right.
After 6 boys.
Yep.
Which that's having 6 boys is a huge thing, you know. I mean, having 7 kids is a huge thing,
It is.
but having 6 boys is a unique challenge. I mean, I don't say that as like a negative
Right. Oh yeah.
thing, but I mean, all of life is a challenge. But today you are doing, you have a family vlog, which has been very successful. We're sitting in your studio. That is really, from the stuff you've told me over the years, this is a dream come true. What you're doing, recording. I mean, you have high standards that you remain, you know, going for these higher standards. But from the things that you've told me over the years about what you'd like to do, you're doing it.
Well, I suppose, and I'll let you ask what you want to ask in a moment, but let me interject here and say, I never dreamed any of this, and I never really imagined what, you know. This is the culmination in the development of years of the Lord, like teaching me and honing me and preparing me and my family and the work that we're doing. And I don't feel like I'm living the dream, but I do feel like the Lord is in the work that we're doing. I suppose I would say it that way.
Well, you know, from where I sit, we when we intersected, my wife and I, we only had 1 or 2 kids at that time, I think, and we had already started traveling, doing music, and so you wanted to ask me about that. I didn't know you had any interest in music or whatever, and then shortly after that we formed a band with a couple of other friends. And it was fun. We had a learning. There's a lot of learning in that. We were learning different things. From what you kept sharing with us stuff about, like when we started recording stuff about like the way people consume music is changing, and you started studying like, vlogging is kind of one of the ways that people connect.
Right.
So that you're not just putting all this effort into creating music, and then there's nobody there to really appreciate it or to absorb it. And so you were learning that, and you would express kind of what you're learning. And we had, I think that's part of what made our band work, is that we had different interests that complemented. But at one point you came to me and said, like, basically, I see my family and my life going this direction, and I was also at a place just saying, like, with us getting together as adults, practicing, taking us away from our kids and our wives,
right,
and then going to do a concert, which is doing that again. It's like we can't really sustain this and be the fathers and husbands that we're called to be. And
then the gal in the band got married.
Right,
so
right.
It was just time.
So if you're either having kids or getting married, this is not working out very well for you.
Right.
And so you got into the vlogging thing, and at that time also, as we were practicing, I could see that your passion was for producing. Like where my passion really is for performing.
Right. 2 totally different worlds.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So when I say, like, you've... what I kept hearing out of you during that time, I see that you're doing. Like and God has allowed you to do that.
He has. Yeah. I was actually really inspired by Carl, and I'm glad that we met and that we got off on that foot, because there was that performance. Not that you're like a performer, like that you're going out, for your own glory, but that desire to, like, connect with people in that kind of way is a true gifting that I don't have. And so I felt like I needed to surround myself with people like that and absorb that, because I tend to be the more, technical, engineerical, behind the scenes kind of guy. So yeah, I'm happy to have and we've gone on tour and I've enjoyed that. But I do feel like over the years, and you alluded to this, that the Lord, for us both, for anyone that's in a creative or kind of ministerial realm, that the Lord really hones us in over time to find the place that He can use us most effectively.
Right.
And if that is, I suppose, to answer a question that you didn't ask, that's the broad theme of this discussion, is that to me is what success looks like, is finding that specific, like generally speaking, we all have a place in the body, but specifically the Lord has honed, if we're living stones to be built together and into, a habitation for the Lord, like He's chiseling us to fit into, like to fit next to each other, and like sometimes
like a puzzle piece.
Yeah, and that can be a difficult process, but it can also be exciting, especially when you like locks two blockheads together.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying too is you're finding out what you were made for, what you were specifically made for and called for, and the more that I understand my calling, the more you understand your calling, the more we learn how ours fit together, and instead of becoming competitive and saying like, I'm jealous of your success in that area, recognizing you're succeeding where you were called to, and I'm doing the same. Like that's the goal. But you mentioned like, performing for me, I'm not doing it for my glory. Ideally, that's true. There is something to that of like, I do it for my pleasure, to a certain extent, because God makes us to enjoy doing the things He made us to do. But that is part of the struggle. I mean, I tried vlogging, because I saw what you were doing. It was very successful. I have not been successful like you have in that. Not anything really comparatively, but I would say that your vlog has been very successful. Your music, so that when you are putting out music, people are looking for it. I would call that success, and that's a good thing. I just did a house concert that the house was full, and people really appreciated it. I would call that success, a good thing. But one thing that we were both, the reason we changed the directions from the band that we were in is because we are fathers and husbands. And so I would like to know from you now, I know you had to pour hours into really understanding how a vlog works, which is one of the ways that you've been successful in it. How does social media work? How do people relate to it? Editing, recording, all those kind of things. And the whole time you're doing that, your family's growing up. And one of the things that you shared in the last time you shared your testimony was that you felt like there was kind of a gap in those teen years where your dad, you were just kind of disconnected a little bit with him, and that was kind of the window that the devil used to get into your life. And so you're kind of at that same crossroads now. You're in a full-blown career, sort of, and your oldest son has just become a teenager.
Right.
So at this point, how would you evaluate what you have done, and where God is leading you from here? That was maybe too much.
No, that's great. I think it's in some ways I will answer the question, but I will preface it by saying that the proof is yet to be determined.
Right.
Right. Because I look up to families that you and I both know, and other families, that we appreciate that have older children, and that to me is the evidence. Because like I feel like you and I are both working still with raw ingredients, and we're baking, baking our progeny, if you will, our children, and yeah, they're turning out well. The dough is rising, and or whatever analogy you want to use there. And I'm very thankful for what I see in my children. And so far, and in that way, I would, consider myself to be a success, at least at this point in the process. And I do feel like that my focus is not always balanced, just to be totally transparent and honest. It's easy for me to, because this studio space is on the property where we live. My house is just a stone's throw away. And it's easy for me to just check out from home. You have a man shed at home, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to check out, go to work,
Right.
and plug in, and the kids come to the door and we overlap from time to time. But I'm in
and you've, in a way, you can tell yourself as like, well, I'm with my family.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Which was something that Lindsey and I early on really had to work out. Because in my mind, I'm going to work. In her mind, I'm going over
To the shed.
or to play or to, whatever the case may be. But yeah, what we do is a lot of work. But if I miss out on the opportunity to invest in my children, then none of this matters.
Right.
It really is just completely pointless.
What does that look like when you flesh that out a bit? Like, when the kids come over here, do they interrupt your day? Do you tell them like, you'll go away, I'll go play with you after 5 o'clock, whatever. How do you juggle that?
It's pretty fluid. I'm very time oriented and kind of like deadline oriented. If I didn't have a deadline for something, I wouldn't get out of bed. I mean, I'm that,
right.
I gotta have it. And so if we're on a crunch, they know that, mom knows that, she can kind of help to keep them, to give me the space that I need to complete what I'm doing. But, and it used to be that I find that in deadline moments, everything is a crisis for me. Because it's like, I got to get this done. Nothing else matters. Our life used to be always like that. It was always deadline, always crisis, always. And I've tried to condense those kind of deadline moments and leave breathing room in between.
Yeah. I can relate to that.
So yeah, I'm very happy when the boys show up, or when mom is homeschooling, the big ones, and she needs to send the little ones over to play with their favorite toys in the studio or whatever. Yeah, I feel like I sit in a place of privilege. I sit in a place of gratitude, of just being able to live and work the way that we do. But it's been 10 years in the making. This doesn't just happen overnight. We've put a lot of time into like looking at the goals for our family and just kind of like laser focus honing in on them over the years. So
yeah, and mistakes are made in that process.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the parallels I think are that me taking my family on the road, where I can attest to the same thing of like there's always pressure, packing the schedule so tight, because a lot of that had to do with, if we're not doing a concert today, I can't say that I was successful today, that I did ministry, that I did something.
Yeah.
And so I'll always go, and you start seeing your wife and your kids, their faces just like,
again.
Yeah. And I think, tell me if this is, if you relate to this, but for me, the way I have really, one of the things that's helped me in that is just realizing that my family is every bit my mission as going and ministering through music. It's even more so.
I would say, yeah, it's the central mission. I mean, our goal as disciples of Jesus is to make disciples. And, for those of us that are in a place where we have, multiple children and somewhat heavy responsibilities, like, I don't interact with a lot of people outside of home. I mean, we go to the grocery store and we go to the hardware store and all that kind of stuff, but I am surrounded by a tribe of young men. That's my number one job. It'd be neat if when someone asks you, hey, what do you do for a living, Like, it would almost sound pretentious to say, oh, well, I'm a follower of Jesus and I make disciples. But that's really how we should reply. Instead of, oh, well, I'm a house painter or I fix cars or whatever the case may be, which tends to become our identity. And I really just want to encourage, any dads watching just to flip the script, like really focus on, because the Lord, He provides. And it's not that it's all about provision, but if we're walking in His will and doing His work, like, He's going to provide for us. It may not always look the way that we want it to, and it definitely can be a struggle and hard at times, but like, He cares for us, and He really wants to see us and our families succeed.
And that is, I think, what frees you up to do what God is calling you to do, is recognizing that He is the provider, that you aren't.
Right.
It isn't on your shoulders to provide, in the sense of, like, a big house, or it is your responsibility to work.
Yes.
But it's not your, you shouldn't be measuring, we shouldn't be measuring our success by how much stuff we have.
Right.
And, I think we know that. It sounds cliche, but there's something in us that feels like if we don't have as much as the next guy, we haven't succeeded in
right.
Providing. That's the way we put it.
Well, put this in context. 10 years ago, Lindsey and I moved out of a house that we were very comfortable in, and over the course of about 9 months, ended up. This is more than 10 years ago. This is 12 years ago. We ended up moving into a tent in the woods on purpose. not like
you don't do anything half-hearted, do you?
Not poor, homeless, whatever, but like on purpose. Like, we badly wanted to get out of debt, and we were willing to do anything to get out of debt.
Dave Ramsey would be proud.
We were totally sold out to Dave's plan. We rented out our house to pay the mortgage, and we lived on basically nothing. I had a very small salaried job at the time at a local college, and we, in less than a year, we weren't living in a tent for a year, but in less than a year's time, we'd paid off all of our debt. And then we moved into a van, and then we moved into a camper, and then we moved into a tiny house, So it's not, the Lord has taught me through that what His provision looks like in different seasons of our life. Now, I'm not encouraging someone to go out and live in a tent. What I'm saying is that if the way that you live, your passions and desires should be driven by your focus on the Lord,
Yeah, what He has called you to do. I think that was a conscious decision I made about the same time, 10, 11, maybe 12 years ago, but of like, I can't think in terms of what can I afford to do, but what is God calling me to do?
Right.
That He's going to become my boss. He's the one who writes the paycheck.
That's right.
And so now I'm free to do anything that He's calling me to do. But in that, there's the responsibility of being honest.
That's right.
About what He's really calling you to, as opposed to what you would like to imagine you're going to be.
And also in that is learning how to lovingly nurture our wives.
Right.
Because it's easy for someone, like, you're a driven man, I know that. I'm a driven man. And it's easy just to like forge ahead and just like, come on, let's go, put your boots on.
Yeah.
And to kind of drag your family along with you. And I have failed at that. Like, this interview with my wife would probably be brutal.
Oh, we should have done that. But actually, that might be a good podcast another time with both of our wives.
There you go.
On there, that could be very interesting.
And she's been very loving, gracious, and kind along the way. And I have learned how to say, okay, I just need to put my agenda on the on the side. If we can both, using a triangle analogy, if we're both pointed to, if we have the same purpose, the same focus, and the same vision, then that friction becomes less and less over time.
Yeah.
But there is a give and take there, and I've seen so many husbands that are just driven, fathers that are driven, that just drag their family through it, and that's not healthy either.
No, the kids leave as soon as they can.
Yeah.
In that situation. No, knowing what you are called to, and also knowing what your family is called to, is part of, I think, that process of learning how to win your family. Like, my family, we're a family band. My goal in that, I know not all of my kids are going to be like lifelong musicians, but I want them to always love music, and I want them to always love, especially worship. I want them to love Jesus through music.
Right.
So that's a delicate thing, but I think that overall my kids so far have embraced that as like, part of their identity is I am part of this family band,
Right.
and we lead worship, and so they do it sometimes with pride. They're glad, they're proud that they can do this, but sometimes they do it as a duty. Sometimes I think the older ones are starting to do that as a calling.
Right.
But in vlogging, my wife and my kids, for the most part, they don't like it.
Right.
They don't, and that's probably one of the reasons why it hasn't really worked as well for us. What part for you with your family? You guys have vlogged a long time, and it appears that the kids enjoy it. What part do they play in what you're doing? Like, how do you incorporate them into the family calling, so it's something they own rather than something they have to do? Or is that a goal? I don't know.
I wish I'm laughing because obviously I know what happens behind the scenes.
Right.
And that's the case. That's the case in any type of work that you do.
Right.
And in answering your question, let me say that whether it's family band or vlog or family business or whatever, fill in the blank, like find something. Find something and do it together as a family. Even if you're have a full-time job or whatever, like get a side hustle, get something going, that you can, because it's so valuable. You know that, I know that. It just is, the richness that's there is just, I think that's worth.
You mean doing it together?
Yeah, as a family.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, there was a time when I felt like we as a family needed to go on the mission field. And we actually flew all the way to Oregon and met with the family. I'm going to answer your other question in a moment, but this is...
You might have to remind me what I asked.
Part of it.
Yeah.
We flew all the way to Oregon and met with a family about going to another country. And in that process, the Lord showed us, you're not ready for this, the international thing, because my wife and I weren't unified. Now, this has been a decade ago, but we feel like we got a download from him at that time that we should write and record music together, because my wife is musically gifted and I like the production side of things.
Just while you're mentioning that, she's a huge reason that you've been successful on YouTube too, just as far as musically, not to take anything away from you.
Well, that's why I married her. For her voice.
Okay,
right?
Okay, yeah.
One reason. I heard her sing and I was like, I need to know this girl.
Yeah, she's got an amazing voice.
And so we felt like we needed to unify around a central thing for our family. And I just feel, where there is no vision, the people perish. That is so true in a family. We see dad running off to work and mom is scattered and trying to hold things together at home. And like that happens. That's normal. Bless you for walking in those ways. But we find that the more focused we are, the more productive and successful we feel as a family, not in terms of like numbers and dollars and cents and all those kinds of things, but just like the unity and the peace that we have in our home.
Yeah.
However, to answer your question about how my children respond, it's not always fun. It's not always pleasurable. I can be snappy. I can be, like, hey, come on, like we got to get this done. I slotted out an hour. This should only take 45 minutes.
Right.
What's going on? And like I said, that can happen in any type of scenario, whether you're running a business or whatever. So it's not unique here.
And it's bound to happen too when you're training. I mean, I grew up painting houses with my dad. I learned to love it, honestly. I still enjoy painting to this day, but there were plenty of times where we had to get a scolding or whatever and sometimes when he got too hot too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I find that the more over the years, it used to be like, hey, let's just go with the flow, and like you guys just always be smiling and ready to say the right thing, which is impossible. That's a pressure that we can't put on our children. And like you said, they'll be ready to fly as soon as they're old enough to do so. What we've done recently in the past year or so is like pretty much like pre-plan. We don't like necessarily script the entire vlog, but and it's probably evident in our vlogging style, if you will. But the more preparation, pre-planning that I can do, it used to be that I would I really want the boys to make an announcement or something, or share something with our viewers, and I'll be like, okay, now here's your line, just go ahead and say it. And then I turn the camera on them and they just start melting, and I'm like, oh boy, this is not going to end well.
Yeah.
So we practice those things.
Okay.
And I've learned to slow down and back up. And
slowing down is a huge
take
part
the
of
pressure
it.
off. So
Yeah, I concur with getting kids to perform on a stage too. Of like, there have been many times where, I just had to take my foot off the gas,
right,
and also just allow them to make mistakes, because I think sometimes them making mistakes, I'm afraid it reflects poorly on me,
right,
which is just
well,
pride.
that's just an ego,
yeah.
And we always run the risk, and particularly for you and I, because of the type of work that we do, of creating performance-oriented children,
right,
and we don't want that. There's an unfortunate, pressure there because of what we have chosen to do with our families that other folks don't have to deal with. But the same principles apply. The hole in the wall family that kind of keeps to themselves and is very pleasant and decent and all those types of things. When they're out in public or when they're at church, little Sammy, you better, little Susie, you better do and say the right thing. Like ours just happens to be on a level where we have 10 or 50 or 100,000 eyeballs on it, which becomes exponentially more complicated. But the same principles apply on all levels within our own families. So.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people watching this or listening to this today that would be, they'd say, well, that's great, but my spouse is not on board. I want to serve God. I want my family to be kingdom oriented, but my spouse won't cooperate. I mean, we've alluded to this already. You talking about, bringing Lindsey along. I know for me, the same with Susie, with my wife, for traveling, what would you say to someone who says, well, my spouse just won't cooperate?
Two things come to mind. One is your spouse is passionate about something. If their heart is connected with the Lord, there's a passion there somewhere. And you're passionate about something, and so there has to be some overlap. There has to, if this is completely random off the top of my head, but if you're, and this is a non-spiritual example, but if your spouse was into, flowers and you're into basketball, for example, like those seem very different. But I guarantee you, if we sat down long enough, we could figure out a way.
Yeah, you could name your team like the Chicago Roses or something.
There's got to be a way to find, if you have two overlapping circles, that space in the middle, and you just focus on that and just focus on that. And it may be narrow and strange at first, but the more you get into it, the more I find that the more you kind of play on your spouse's side of the field, the more they're willing to play on yours.
Absolutely.
And then that overlap, I'm trying to draw two circles here where they overlap, but you know what I mean, a Venn diagram. The more you cooperate with one another, those circles just become one over time.
That's I totally concur with that, and that one of the things I've had to learn is I've done that with pressuring my kids because we just drove a number of hours and we're going to perform. They're tired, they're cranky. We get on stage and one of them is throwing a fit or crying or doesn't want to perform, and I'm getting mad at them. And my wife has come to the rescue and of just being kind of giving me perspective again, saying, see the big picture here,
right?
Beyond this moment,
right?
What are you doing to your kid?
Oh, that hurts so bad.
I know.
Our wives are so good at doing that.
Yeah. But I've also seen that my wife is not just like that with my kids, but with other people.
Right.
And part of what has helped me, and I think helped us, is recognizing that my wife has a ministry.
Right.
And that her ministry is every bit as important as my ministry. It's not like, well, the dad has a ministry, and if there's time, mom gets to do a few things.
Right.
They're equally important, which sometimes means that I have had to set aside my agenda for the day and do some babysitting so that my wife can bloom in the way that God made her. And the ironic thing is that this year, as you're watching this today, we're on the road, and this road trip happened because my wife said she wanted to do it. Which was like, well, I didn't see that coming.
Right, yeah. So, the other thing I would say about that is keep your... I've used the image of like being laser focused, which, for starters, you might just need to have like a floodlight, just kind of point in the general direction that you feel like you where you feel gifted. Maybe you see giftings in your spouse that they haven't realized yet, and you just kind of want to like help nurture that in them. Like just shine a wide spotlight in the direction you want to move, and then over time hone in rather than just like picking one specific thing. Like for our example, our family mission statement, which I have right on the wall over here, it says to glorify God by serving others through word, song, and deed, which kind of encapsulates what we do now, but it could also look completely different, 5 years from now, as the Lord continues to develop, or as our children, grow into their own personal giftings and things like that. So.
And communication is so important. You can't really over-communicate with your wife or your kids. You can't over-communicate with your family. With doing any kind of marketing thing, you're supposed to just decide who is my target audience, what am I presenting to them, how do I want them to respond? Like, what is the action at the end of the day when they're done consuming what I'm putting out there? Where do I want them to go? I think we need the same thing for our families. Like, we need to know, what is the end result of my life of being a dad? What is the end result? What do I want my family to look like in 20 years?
Right.
And I think that's that big spotlight that you're talking about, is like, before we get into specifics about calling and, we want to record an album or we want to do this mission trip, what is the big picture? What kind of people should my family be?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's huge. I feel like if we miss that, then we have completely missed the point. I feel like, I find myself saying this to people often. I have a friend right now who wants to buy a house, and he's sending me links and asking me input, actually a number of friends, but what do you think of this or what do you think of that? And they're all nice houses, but like, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish here?
What's the purpose of it?
That really is. So I think about that with my, with Forrest, who's 13 now. What do I want? Because it'd be easy for me to say, oh, well, I want him to become this or do that or whatever. Ultimately, I want him to be like Jesus. And I want to be more like Jesus myself. I want us to, reflect God's glory in all that we do, regardless of what it is. Does he have specific skills? Could I see him getting into woodworking or engineering or something technical with his hands? Could I see Joseph, the next one down, being more of a artistic, creative-minded person? Absolutely. But like we talked about at the beginning of our discussion, those things are not our identity. If we find our identity in those things, if your children find their identity in being the Carl Gessler band, then like that's all well and good on an earthly level,
and especially when they're young,
right? Yeah. And so nurturing that in them there's just nothing more important.
Yeah, I mean, I think like if my kid's identity is that I'm a musician, what happens when they get married? Particularly when I'm a musician and I'm part of this family. What happens when they get married and they are their own family? What happens to that identity? Because it just got shaken up. And so that there is that, what we've been talking about really all morning is the universal calling of men to be leaders in their family. That success is really raising a family a home that is full of the love of Jesus, that our kids identify with our family and our faith, because they experienced it as love and life-giving. The rest of it is, we're talking about our skills, which skills are important. And I think that's why we like to talk when we get together at a picnic and say, hey, what do you do?
Right.
We're interested to know, what is your particular skill set?
Right.
But what we want our kids, skills are cool. They're cool like instruments and tools are cool.
Sure, yeah.
But but what we want, I think, is for our kids to identify with our faith as really being like the life-giving source.
Yeah, I've been thinking about like the pinnacle of human skill is seen in places like Hollywood or the pop music industry in our kind of realm, or in, whatever, fill in the blank, the highest pinnacle. And you can be skilled all the way to the top. The in terms of like pure raw, like visual quality, storytelling quality, technical quality and ability. I don't watch, nor do I agree with what Hollywood puts out, but they're good at what they do. They're good at what they do. And like, if you want that for your children, go for it. But that's not the ultimate purpose. I would say the higher calling, and I'm not there, and I don't know that I'll ever be there. I know I won't ever be there because I'm just one guy. But the highest calling is getting, I believe, as close to that level of proficiency or whatever the case may be, but to take it and rip it out of the hands of the world and point it right toward our Heavenly Father. Yeah, that to me is like just I get absolutely excited about that, and that to me is success.
Yeah, I mean, as you say that, I just think about Phil Keaggy, who's one of the best guitar players in the world. And he gave his life to the Lord as a young man and gave his career to that. But I just have this image of someone practicing guitar and a child wanting their attention. When you can put that guitar down and give them attention, now they not only embrace you, they also embrace what you do, because they realize that they're more important than that thing,
right?
And that moment. And I think in that way we... both things will succeed.
Yes.
And it's that principle, that kingdom principle of, if you want to gain your life, you've got to lose it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is nurturing both the skills that we see in our children, but within the context. I think, yeah, so just to reiterate, I think a little bit of what we're saying here is a lot of parents probably nurture the giftings in their children and kind of fit Jesus into that, like, oh yeah, you're this or that, and Jesus is a part of it, as opposed to like nurturing the Lord in our children, and then kind of fitting these skills into who they are as a person.
Let your love for Jesus come out in your skill.
Right.
And anyway, we've probably gone long enough today, but I just to say, there's a way that people can play an instrument and another person can worship on an instrument, and that I think is the goal, is to get this to be worshiping through our skills.
That's right.
Yeah. So, Bracken, any final thoughts?
Let me just think about that for a moment. Are we good? Are we good on time?
Good.
We got 8 minutes.
Yeah, we do. So maybe let me just bring it back to your to what you're doing here.
Okay.
So Bracken, you are here in your studio. You're still doing your vlog. What do you see going forward now with your family at this stage? What do you see happening in the next few years, and what is your vision?
I would like to broaden my vision for my family. It was easy early on to kind of operate in one stream, if you will, because you can imagine like a mama and her ducks just kind of following along.
All in a row. Yeah.
But now the ducks have their own. They're starting to get feathers and want to fly on their own. And so, even though my children are still young, that's coming soon, like way sooner than I can imagine. Like I'm able to cut Forrest loose on some of the tools in the wood shop by himself, and he's just ready to go,
Wow.
So like I really need to kind of diversify, I suppose, my perspective with my family. We've gotten to a point on the YouTubes where we enjoy it, we love it, and we're going to continue to do it. And the Lord has provided through that for our ability to branch into other areas. And I don't know creatively, I don't have necessarily anything that I can share right now. There's some ideas floating around, but suffice to say, we're not going anywhere, but things are kind of transitioning, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been doing it for about 5 years, and we've learned a lot, and we're excited for what the Lord has ahead for us.
Well, very good. Well, thank you for this conversation, Bracken, and
Yeah.
I'm sure many folks watching and listening today would say, yes, thank you. Keep going on. We enjoy what you're doing. So,
And I appreciate everyone who listens and supports what we do. We are very grateful, very humbled by just so many people that have poured into our lives, and we just want to turn our life inside out and pour it right back out to them. So,
amen. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Bracken. Great guy. If you aren't aware of his vlog, then go ahead and check out Tiny Notes from Home and their great music, Sounds Like Rain. And if you're new to my channel, please subscribe and also join us on our Telegram channel. I'm actually more excited about that. I mean, I love doing these videos and these podcasts, but the Telegram channel, we really get to dive in deeper and make more of a connection. It's more of a community. So that's always below in the links for the show notes. And we will see you next week. God bless.